All right, so human nature. We conceptualized this exhibition when lockdown started last year in April. And the curatorial process has been very interesting because we had no access for the first few months to any of our collections or our books or materials. So we spent a lot of time just like calling up a lot of academics, environmentalists, activists to hear what they had to say on a subject that we actually knew comparatively very, very little about. We started from ground zero. So we're very grateful to all those people, and hopefully we're doing the subject some justice and to a certain extent. Okay, down. Right, so right, why we call it human nature. We trace the history of Singapore's natural environment, but we're looking at it through the lens of human relationships. The X represents multiple potential relationships. So we leave it up to the visitor to sort of interpret what the relationship between humans and nature is. So the whole exhibition, I'm not sure how many of you guys have been. So it's great to see some of you guys have. If you haven't, we're open until the 26th of September, which is hardly any time at all. So please come down. We're open every single day, except public holidays. And we're open from 10 a.m. to 9 p.m. No need to book tickets, just come and have fun. Yeah, so there are 3 sections to this whole thing. Section 1 is understanding nature. So we're looking at the study of natural history, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. The second one, we called it consuming nature, where basically as human beings, we spend the whole of the 19th and early 20th century desecrating the entirety of the island of Singapore. We'll talk about that as well. And then the third section, which we won't focus so much on today because it's very contemporary, is remaking, we call it remaking nature, where we look at more contemporary relationships with Singapore's natural history, right? So in the exhibition, we've got many, many interesting videos that we're not going to show now in the interest of time, but this is a video still from an oral history interview that was done by a research team that visited Kampung Sungai Timun in Johor, where the Orang Selita are currently living. Yeah, we wanted as far as possible to introduce as many perspectives, especially on human relationships with nature. And this interview was interviewing the headman of the village, Salim Palun, and he was talking about how the Orang Asli and the Orang Laut, who are the indigenous peoples of the region, especially Singapore, they have a very unique relationship with nature that is now fading away because their lifestyle is under threat. Yeah, in fact, the Orang Selita village in Johor, they're one of the last few living Orang Laut communities that are able to somewhat maintain their lifestyle, but even that is being threatened at the moment. So again, these are all other interviews that we've done. Please do visit the exhibition to get a good look at all of them. I mean, we will post this on social media once the exhibition closes, but it's nice to see them in context. Right, let's get straight into stories and highlights before this takes too long. So I will start with understanding nature. And I think this quote is a very good, I guess, metaphor, or it's a very good example of the attitude to which a lot of publications on natural history that we have, extant in our collection, the attitude that they take towards natural history. So because the National Library is a colonial legacy institution, a lot of our publications that we have, especially from the colonial period, come from this point of view, right? So this is a quote from the Marquess of Hastings, who was a big patron of the East India Company and the East India Company Museum, which you can see there's a picture in the background. I'll go back a bit just so you can see the picture by itself. Oh, I can't do that. Okay, never mind. Right. So he says the East India Company has joined to add the acquisition of knowledge to the power, the riches, and the glory which its acts have contributed to the British Empire and name. So whenever we talk about especially European efforts to study natural history in the region, we have to view them in this colonial context, in that while a lot of them were, of course, they were scientists, they were doctors, they had a genuine interest and passion for scientific study and scientific inquiry, and a lot of their discoveries, in full quotation marks, were to that end. They were also working under the larger framework of colonization, where the East India Company came to Singapore and the region and many other places in order to profit economically. And so any knowledge, any study of science, all of that was ultimately to that end, because that was where the money was coming from, and that was a general intention that most of the colonial actors had when they came here. So most of the people who were doing natural history study when it comes to the European perspective were actually colonial servicemen. So a good example of this is, if I go to the next slide. Okay, so is Thomas Horshfield. And these are illustrations taken from one of his more famous books called Zoological Researches in Java. Thomas Horshfield was an American surgeon who initially started working for the Dutch East India Company as a surgeon. And he signed up with them specifically so that he could come to Java and study the natural history there. Yeah, so his day job was being a surgeon, and his side hustle, I guess you could call it, was studying natural history. So he went around collecting specimens or commissioning drawings. So here we have a Malayan bear, and we have the Asian small clawed otter. Yeah, so Horshfield, when he was here, obviously he did all this work. In 1811, when the British invaded Java and they basically took over from the Dutch as a colonial power, Horshfield met Stuart Raffles and they became friends. And Stuart Raffles had this, I guess, habit of collecting natural historians to add to his, I guess, repertoire of people who would, on his behalf and on behalf of the British East India Company, go out into the region, including Singapore, to study natural history. So, I mean, Raffles kind of, I just saw himself as a self-styled naturalist, but mostly other people did the work, such as Thomas Horshfield. And under Raffles' patronage, right, he conducted a lot of the research in Java that went into this book. Ultimately, all of his collections in terms of natural history specimens, his field notes, everything, his books and publications all got donated to the East India Company Museum in London. And later those collections were then transferred to the Natural Museum, the Museum of Natural History, as part of the British Museum. So again, a lot of overseas European collections, you know, basically were transferred out of the region this way, as with many other things, including cultural objects. Okay, another one from a European natural historian. This one is even older than Thomas Horshfield's one. Okay, just for reference, Thomas Horshfield's one was around the 1850s, if I'm not mistaken, right? This book comes from 1758. It's by George Edwards, who was a British natural historian. Unlike Thomas Horshfield, he never actually set foot in any of the places where the animals came from that he was studying, right? He relied solely on specimens that had been brought from overseas to the British Museum. And I mean, you can see some of the illustrations, which he did himself, are very beautiful. Some of them are more accurate than others. So for example, we have this slide over here on the far left. Can we have some guesses in the chat as to what this animal is? Okay, someone's got it right away. It's an orangutan, but honestly, it doesn't look like any orangutan I've ever seen. People, yeah, okay, some people do say that it looks very much more like a person than it does an orangutan. And George Edwards also made the observation. I speculate to say that the reason why it looks so weird, it might have been that whoever did the taxidermy for the orangutan did a very poor job, and therefore, you know, making it look more like a person than primate. And also the reason why they're all in all these poses might be either one is George Edward's imagination, just like styling them, or they were put into displays and dioramas in the British Museum in funny positions just for the audience's amusement. Yeah. So this sort of study kind of colors most of our publications that we have in the library, and a lot of them are very beautiful, but yeah, just have to keep in mind the context in which they were created. And I guess some people might ask, how exactly does the study of this natural history contribute to the East India Company's profits, right? I would say that honestly, the study of animals perhaps doesn't contribute as much in terms of like direct economic profit. But I think like the quote from the Marquess of Hastings said before, right, knowledge is power. And if you want to exert power over an area, the more you understand about it, the better. Yeah, we'll talk more about direct economic profit when we look at botany, which I think is really how the British East India Company harnessed the natural resources of the region. Okay, so apart from animals like fauna, we also look at a lot of the study of plants as when it comes to the context of traditional medicines, by which I mean Malay and indigenous medicines, right? So a lot of doctors, surgeons, pharmacologists were very interested in traditional medicines and remedies from the region. They were looking for active ingredients which they could then incorporate into, I guess, Western pharmacology and toxicology. Right. This is a very good example of an anthropologist, William Walter Skeets, who was in Malaysia. He was studying anthropology in general. So he was looking at the practices of various Malay villages, but he consolidated all of these things into a book that he titled Malay Magic. Right. So in Skeets's book, he does look at practices to do with magic and ritual, but he also looks at other practices to do with natural history. So for example, this one, right, is the process in which pawangs, right, or magic practitioners, right, or even just, magic practitioners look for something called agar wood or laka wood, which is the aromatic heartwood of a tree. Back then and today, it's considered one of the most expensive tree products in the world, still being sold all over the world today. And it's very hard to tell from the outside of a tree whether or not the heartwood is valuable, because you have to cut the tree down just to find out. But the Pawangs in Malaysia had basically found special methods of identifying trees. So you can see a whole list of them down there. If the tree is full of knots, if the bark is full of moss and fungus, if the hardwood sounds hollow. So they use all these different methods, right, to find out. And all of this expertise, I would say, can only have been gained from the population being there for hundreds of years, developing, experimenting, right, searching and seeking. But the fact that Skeets put all of this knowledge under the overarching umbrella of Malay magic, I think is a good example, again, of some of the Western or European attitudes towards epistemology and knowledge that was different from Western epistemology and knowledge. Yeah, so they basically view other knowledge systems as inferior or unscientific. Hence, everything being given the umbrella of magic. In fact, in Skeets's book, he doesn't even just talk about, environmental practices. He talks about things like agricultural practices, mining practices, sports, and even games, right? All of that, again, is put under the umbrella of magic. So, yeah, right. These are just more extra methods that they used to find out if the wood was valuable or not. It's very interesting read. You can find it online. I highly recommend a read of it, because even though he does, he does kind of denigrate the practices, it is actually considered still today one of the more comprehensive and, I wouldn't say unbiased, but less biased compilations of anthropology from that time. Okay, now it's a quiz. Okay, so we're going to talk about someone called Mohammed Hani, and he was a local collector at the Botanic Gardens, active between 1890 and 1926. He's one of the most prolific collectors and botanists in Singapore from that period. What was his collection specialty? Okay, so Mohammed Hani is credited with collecting over 2,000 species of ferns. And a lot of these specimens that he collected are known as type specimens. So they are the first specimen upon which all other descriptions of that fern are based. And most of his collections are today kept in the Kew Gardens in London, because back then there were strong ties between the Botanic Gardens in Singapore and the Kew Gardens. They would send specimens back all the time. So a lot of his work is actually located overseas, as is a lot of the work of a lot of local collectors, to be honest. Okay, so the answer is ferns. Okay, yep, so there's Mohammed Hani right there. We're very fortunate to have a picture of him. This was taken from his obituary. All right, so we're talking about him because, okay, so I mentioned earlier that most of the publications that we have are written by Europeans about the natural history of the region. Not hardly anything at all is currently preserved from local communities because most of their knowledge is shared through oral history. It's a living history. So this is one of the very few that we've got. It's called Malay Village Medicine, and it was published, co-authored by Isaac Burkill and Mohammed Hani. Mohammed Hani is, I think, still today considered one of the earliest local collectors and botanists to be given co-authorial credit on a book about Malay knowledge on botany, which is mind-boggling. This was in 1930. Yeah. So on the right hand side, that's Burkill right there. Fun fact about Burkill, he married his cousin. Yeah, okay, sorry. I just love that fact. Oh, but his wife, Ethel Burkill, was actually a mycologist. So she studied fungi, and a lot of her collections are also in the Kew Gardens. Fun fact. Okay, back to the thing. So in Malay Village Medicine, Mohammed Hani and Isaac Burkill went up and down the Malay Peninsula talking to Bomo, so traditional medicine practitioners, and Bidans, who were midwives, to look for local information on plants that were used for various remedies and cures. And we have some examples over here. I just chose really common ones that we all can recognize. So this is hibiscus, Rosa sinensis, national flower of Malaysia, right? So you can see here that it's quite interesting because they actually put down the different places where they got the information on. So you can see that sometimes regionally, when it goes from like town to town, they have slightly different uses, but a lot of similarities. So for example, most communities used it for fevers, inflammation of some kind, or headaches. And I mean, today, hibiscus is still quite commonly used as a natural remedy for all these things as well. Right, so bunga raya. One more example is belimbing, right? So this is a fruit in the star fruit family. And again, we can see that it's used for various things. You pound the leaves into a paste for venereal disease, for childbirth, for itches and coughs. Yeah, so again, belimbing today is still used as a natural remedy. So yeah, this is all the kinds of information you can find in that book. Again, this is also online. So if you'd like to do more research about this, it's all available on the Biodiversity Heritage Library website. Okay, a lot of local collectors were actually the ones doing the groundwork of identifying plants, going out into the field, doing collecting, so that then the European botanists back in the Botanic Gardens could then write papers about them and get published. And we don't know a lot about these collectors because they rarely have published work, and not a lot is mentioned about them outside of their work. But it's very cool because we worked with the Botanic Gardens Library and Archives, who were very kind to give us access to their collections. And we found some letters. Actually, this one is written by Mohammed Hani. And I think this is a very good example of his botanical prowess. So he was back then working out of the Botanical Gardens in Penang. And he was in constant communication with the director of gardens back in Singapore, who at that time, I think, was Henderson. Right. So I don't know if you can read it. I'll read a little bit of it. So he says, with regards to the fern, I am sure I know the place. So it means that basically the director of Singapore Gardens wrote to Hani saying, I'm looking for this very specific species of fern. Could you find it for me? And immediately Hanif writes back saying, I know exactly the place, but I don't know whether it has been cleared of plants because it's on a rock very near the Bel Retiro, which is a heritage building in Penang. So he knows that, oh, it's on this hill next to this old colonial house. So right after that, in the same month, he said, I went up to the hill yesterday and I got this plant. I'm not going to read the scientific word because I'm going to butcher the pronunciation. But the fact that he knows exactly where the fern is and how to get it and where to get it is just, it boggles my mind. So basically, the work of these local botanists, because they knew the terrain, they knew the geography, they knew the plant identification, it made the work of the Botanic Gardens so much faster, right? Because imagine these European botanists having to trample out there by themselves, not knowing what they're looking for or where. It would be almost impossible. And yet, do they get any credit? No. Okay, so we're looking at some more examples of other local botanists who were working in the Botanic Gardens at the times. So here we have Chia. right? So he was known in the gardens as Chia, right? And yeah, we can see hints of the work that Chia did through letters written back and forth from Botanic Gardens. So in this letter, for example, written to Henderson, who was then the director of Singapore Botanic Gardens, you have doubtless got Chia back again with the collections, right? So they went to Tapis and they collected 174 of flora, not sure what they were collecting, timber samples, I think. And it's quite nice that at the bottom, he then writes, I found Kia very helpful and a very pleasant chap to work with, and I can lend him $10. Okay, so that's just an interesting note, how you can see just little snippets of the work that they did in the gardens. Oftentimes, again, even though a lot of the credit technically goes to them for the collection and identification of these, we only know what they did in the letters, or if, you know, when they've passed away, people sometimes name species after them, but that's about it. They don't even get footnotes. Okay, this is another guy, Muhammad Noor, right? So here it says Muhammad Noor and co are presumably going strong at Cameron. I presume this is like, you know, Cameron Highlands area. So they were collecting things there. Yeah, found another mention of Muhammad Noor. He definitely did go to the summit. Yeah, with Foxworthy in Kelantan. So again, lots of these expeditions, they always brought a local botanist along because yeah, they need someone to identify plants and navigate the terrain. Yeah, okay. So, right, another part of the exhibition we tried to do as much as possible was to include natural history specimens. So this is a picture of a hawksbill turtle preserved. If you look closely, you can see its eyes are literally made of marbles. Right, so the folks at the Lee Kong Chian Natural History Museum were very, very generous and gracious. They let us just pick anything we wanted and put it in. Right, this is a quote by Frederick Chasen, who at one point was the only taxidermist at the Raffles Museum, and then he later became the curator. He said, "There's an elaborate taxidermic method, the use of which ensures that a specimen remains a thing of beauty and a joy forever." That's nice. So yeah, these are some examples of what you can see if you come down to the exhibition, right? We try to put, you know, natural history specimens next to the books just to give it some context. So you're not just looking at the tapir in the book, you can see the tapir in real life as well. Okay, quiz time again. Yeah, so Henry Corner brought domesticated burrow monkeys from Kelantan to be employed in the SBG. What were they originally reared for? I think this one, a lot of you will get it right because the monkeys still do that today. Yeah, okay, so these monkeys, Brooke, we can see a picture of here. They've been reared and domesticated to collect coconuts for hundreds of years throughout the Malay Peninsula and in Thailand as well. And until today, they're still doing it, right? They still use monkeys to harvest coconuts. If you look it up online, lots of animal rights people are very mad about that, right? Well, point remains is that Henry Corner, who was at one point the assistant director of the SBG, he was trying to write a book about trees in Malaya, and he wanted samples from treetops. Couldn't climb the trees, and he didn't want to cut a tree down just to get samples. So he found these monkeys and thought, hey, they can collect coconuts. Surely they collect other things as well, including tree specimens. So he bought a few back to the Botanic Gardens, and he retrained them to collect treetop specimens for him. What he would basically do is send them up into the tree, and you can see they're collared, and he would kind of like try to shout commands at them to like shake the trees so that the fruits and the seeds and the leaves and branches would fall down. He would collect them. So there's even an article in the Straits Times that you can see here of the monkeys' new career. Interestingly, the monkeys were actually employed as civil servants and they got a salary. I guess the salary went towards buying treats. I'm not sure. Right? But yeah, so the monkey in this picture in the Straits Times article is called Mera. That was Corner's first monkey and his favorite monkey, right? It's a sad story though, because one point they were bringing Mera out to collect specimens at Bukit Timah on like a daily basis. And one day they accidentally sent Mera up a tree that was poisonous to the monkey. And so he like ate or inhaled some pollen and got really sick, stopped eating, and eventually had to be put down. So that's really sad. And Corner wrote a book about the monkeys. You can see on the left-hand side called Botanical Monkeys. You can see him, the picture on the cover is the Mera and the tree and him sitting there with a lead. Right? He's really sad about it. He was saying that, you know, Mera was very cute and very mischievous. He talked about how he had to train Mera to collect things, and he would like bribe him with lemonade so that he would not stop playing around and, you know, actually do work. Yeah. Every single chapter after Mera passes away, he's like, oh, the fun days of Mera are over. They will never be the same again. Yeah, it's very sad. Okay, anyway, the book on the right-hand side, where you can see the silhouette of the monkey on the tree, that was the book that Corner eventually published with the monkey's work. Yeah. That's him. Haha, it's a funny picture of him with Jumbo and Pute. Funny story about Pute. Not all the monkeys are so sweet like Mera. Okay, Pute, you can see the vicious one trying to kill Corner. He, at one point, bit a whole chunk out of the muscle of Corner's arm, and it gave him reoccurring infections for the rest of his life. Fun fact. Okay, he eventually shot the monkey. I'm so sorry. Yeah. Right, okay, another interesting thing is that when they collect specimens in the botanic gardens and it gets put in the herbarium, there's always a tag at the bottom, and it tells you who the collector of the specimen was. And you can see they credit Mera, they credit the monkey. Okay, this is still found in botanic gardens till today, which is amazing. Yeah, so it's experiences and relationships like this with fauna that you don't really get anymore. I mean, you can't. Okay, on the topic of animal trade, because we have to remember that Mera was bought as animal trade, right? Singapore was a hotbed of animal and wildlife trade, whether it's alive or dead specimens, right? Because we were an entrepreneur, so all of the activity of like hunting and trading in the region oftentimes went through Singapore. Orchard Road, Rochor Road, all of those places were like chock-a-block lined with wildlife shops, whether it's exotic birds, songbirds. You can see here someone selling an orangutan. You see on the other side, somehow they have a leopard sitting in a rickshaw, question mark, yes. So yeah, oh, another one here. This is again a bird shop, right? I love this went unregulated for a very, very, very long time. And I mean, there were some people who were trying to regulate it, but no legislation was ever truly passed until recent years. Okay, another big thing that happened was, people started filming things like wildlife documentaries in the 1930s. It was a big deal. A lot of like very exotic and orientalized depictions of jungle and nature. Right, so this was another interesting relationship. One of the more famous ones that happened in Singapore is Frank Buck's Bring 'Em Back Alive. So Frank Buck was this American game hunter, famous for bringing animals back alive. So if you want something for a zoo or a circus, he's the guy you go to. He was good friends with the then Sultan of Johor, which you can see here has just shot a tiger. He was a big hunter himself and had large grounds upon which Frank Buck would film a lot of his animal encounters. So he liked to say that it was like real documentary footage filmed in the wild, but actually a lot of it was trick studio photography, as you can see in the headline there. So for example, there were a lot of tricks, like if you wanted to film a tiger leaping at a camera, you would just hold a live chicken behind the camera and get a tiger to like jump at it. They would do horrible things like put tigers and snakes in a pit and have them fight, because they were like half starved. So that's a lot of animal cruelty right there as well. Yeah. So again, there's some more pictures of game hunting in Malaya. In the middle there, that's Theodore Hubak, right? He's a famous game hunter who was eventually, he was made the wildlife commissioner of Malaysia, of the Federated Malay States, which is a bit ironic because he used to hunt. And I guess they thought he would have the expertise to then regulate game hunting. Yeah. So this is him having shot Seladang. Seladang was actually eventually named after him. That the scientific species is Hubaki. Yeah. So interesting thing is he and Frank Buck had some beef because Frank Buck kept claiming that he was the first one to ever like capture and photograph a seladang and brought it to civilization. When they say civilization, they mean America, all right? And basically Theodore Hubak was like, excuse you, it was me. So that's quite cute. Okay, so I will now transition over to Jialin's slides by this quote, which is just to remind us all that during this entire time that all of what I described was happening, they were doing study, right, of natural history, writing lots of books, doing lots of explorations. The whole of the natural environment was at that time being destroyed by plantation agriculture. So this is a quote by Alfred Russel Wallace in 1854. He was in Singapore in the dairy farm area collecting specimens of insects. He noted that, yeah, the whole island will soon be denuded of its indigenous vegetation, the climate will be materially altered for the worse, and countless tribes of insects will become extinct. So he himself, he was aware of the urgency of documenting and collecting while it was still there. So yeah, on that note, I will pass it over to Jialin, who will talk about the second section, consuming nature. This is a really sad one.
Okay, hi everybody. So yeah, like Georgina has extensively shared, a lot of the colonial endeavor really was a lot about naturalist study, right? People who are actually legitimately interested in natural world, such as Alfred Russel Wallace, who come to the region to study and sort of supposedly discover new species of animals. But of course, a lot of all this naturalist study and scientific studies took place really under the auspices of colonialism in the region, right? And that's something that we really cannot miss when we talk about the relationship of humans to nature in Singapore and in the larger Southeast Asian region. So of course, when Europeans were interested in the natural world, right, part of it was really for sort of pure scientific interest, but the more like sort of the more obvious part, I suppose, is really they want to take charge of the economic control of this region, right? Take charge of the economic crops of the region, which was really the main reason why the British and the Dutch even came to Southeast Asia and firstly to Indonesia, right, in the 1600s in the first place, right? They wanted to take charge of the spice trade and make tons of money out of it, essentially, through the East India companies, right? So of course, when Raffles and Farquhar, they came looking for a new colony, and they eventually settled in Singapore, that was also a very huge part of their plan, right? Not only did they want to make sort of a new trading port in the area, but they were also keen to convert Singapore into a spice island that was modeled after the Dutch Maluku Islands, or the Dutch-controlled Maluku Islands that were in Indonesia at the point of time. So, and that's really what shaped a lot of the early transformation of Singapore Island as well. Because when Raffles and Farquhar, they sailed down to Singapore on the Indiana, they were actually carrying a lot of different seeds of different spices. Like for example, they have nutmeg seeds, they have pepper seeds, and they were carrying all these seeds here sort of to test and cultivate it in Singapore, which was really took the form, which I'm sure some of you would know. So like there was an experimental garden at the foot of Fort Canning Hill. So a lot of it was really for spice, yeah. So here we have this slide, right? It's about cultivating the colony. So after the British came to Singapore, right, a lot of the land development was really led by the British. So as you can see here, we have two pictures of deforestation happening in Singapore, taken by Chia, Lambert and Co. And it was sort of an photo opportunity, as you can see in these photos, because you see these few men sort of posing among the fallen trees. Ironically, the middle one says in the jungle, but he's standing amidst fallen jungle. Yeah. So a lot of this cutting down of big trees, tall big trees of Singapore in the primary forest of Singapore happened because they wanted to clear the land for settlement and mainly to clear land also for roads that would lead into the hinterland, in the more ulu parts of Singapore, supposedly. Yeah. And what's really interesting is if you notice in the middle photo, right, there's this one man standing to the side of a European man. So this man in this to the left of his, which we presume would be sort of one of the archipelagic Southeast Asian laborers or one of the Chinese or Indian laborers that sort of were in charge actually of like the legwork and the hard work that went into cutting down these forests, because Europeans were just ordering them to do it. But the main people who cut down forests were really a lot of these Southeast Asian laborers. Yeah. And on the right side here, we have a very nice photo, right, of a road actually that cuts through Seletar. So that's the finished product of deforestation, I suppose. And this lithograph print was actually made by Eugene von Ransonet, who was an Austrian diplomat working in Singapore in the 1870s. And he was writing about sort of the scenes and sights of Singapore. And of this photo, right, accompanying this photo, he talks about how, Seletar is most beautiful for the road that cuts through it. Because on both sides of the road, you have very luxuriant greens of the forest, and very tall forest trees that really characterize Singapore. But unfortunately, by the time he was writing this, honestly, most of Singapore was already being deforested for a lot of plantation agriculture as well, which I'll go into in the next few slides. Yep. So of course, when we talk about plantation agriculture in Singapore, there's been many, many crops, that really characterize and have transformed, I suppose, our landscape over the 19th and 20th century. So do you guys want to guess what crops these are? So this few botanical specimens that are on display in the gallery currently were very kindly collected for us by the Botanic Gardens. So like about last October, they actually went out into their own like economic gardens and they cut out like fresh crops for us. And they baked it a few times. I think they baked it like 3-4 times to kill all the insects and all that. And then they baked it and then we framed it and now it's in our gallery. So that was very nice to the Botanic Gardens, yeah. Okay, one correct answer, yes, rubber. Rubber is the crop in the middle. Yeah, I think it's a bit hard to see, but those are like rubber pots and the seeds are inside the rubber pots, yeah, essentially. Gambia, close. Nutmeg, yes, you're correct. On the one on the right is the nutmeg plant. And as you can see, there's like this characteristic red outer covering of the nutmeg, right, which is used for maize. Yeah. And the last plant on the left is actually the pepper plant. So congrats, you guys got it all correct. Yeah, so that's the pepper plant, the pepper leaves, the stem, with the vines, part of the pepper vine. And so into the first crop that really transformed, the first two crops that really transformed the landscape, unfortunately for the worse for most of the 19th century, is really Gambia and pepper. And of course, Gambia and pepper didn't happen after the British came. They were actually happening already before the British came, because Gambia and pepper, the co-cultivation of Gambia pepper was begun already, right, in the Riau Islands, in sort of land holdings owned by Malay plantation owners, where Chinese plantation laborers actually worked under these Malay landholders to co-cultivate Gambia and pepper. So Gambia and pepper were very complementary crops, because Gambia was sort of the waste from Gambia cultivation could actually be used as fertilizer for pepper cultivation. And of course, pepper was a more valuable crop. But the thing is, pepper took much longer to mature. And in the meantime, they needed to sort of earn some money, right? So Gambia was also was a very good interim crop for them to plant, because it plant fast and you mature faster, and your waste from Gambia can actually be used to cultivate your pepper. So that was a very good system. But of course, because there was a bunch of like Chinese clan wars happening, at the tail end of the 18th century. So a lot of the Chinese, especially the Teochew plantation laborers, they were scared and they fled over to Malaya. And some of them settled down in Singapore, where they began to plant Gambia and pepper, under the permission of Temenggung Abdul Rahman. So they planted alongside like the Malays who were already on the island at that point of time. So why pepper? We know why it's important, right? Because pepper, it gives the flavor. Yeah. But for Gambia, right, what's really cool about Gambia is by the 19th century, right, they found a use for Gambia, which was really as a tanning agent for leather, and that made it a really, really popular crop, to be grown and harvested for global export. Yeah, and here we have some photographs from the National Library and National Museum collections. So I think the top right one needs no introduction. It's a picture of the Gambia plant from the William Farquhar collection. Yes, but we're not showing the William Farquhar in the actual exhibition. We are showing another collection, which was in the Botanical Gardens collection. We can come to the main exhibition and look at it. Yeah. And here we have the largest photo on this slide. Is actually a picture of a bangsao hut where Gambia and pepper were typically, where Gambia was typically processed after being harvested. So you see this nice man here is carrying like a huge load of like Gambia leaves, right? That's because the main part of Gambia that's being used is really the leaves. And after a few days of processing, it will turn into either Gambia balls or Gambia cubes, which you can see on the picture here below. Yeah, so these pictures are either taken from archives, or we actually took it from books. So the one at the right bottom here is actually from a book called An Outline of Malayan Agriculture. It's being shown in the exhibition. Yeah, so Gambia really, they really process in all these huts, and afterwards they would be sent sort of via water routes to town area. Yeah, that was before roads were being really built. Here we have another image of people working on the pepper plantation. Yeah. But the thing about Gambia and pepper is that it was really, really destructive to the environment, or especially the cultivation method of Gambia and pepper was really destructive. So sort of like by the 15th year of using a specific plot of land, most of the nutrients on the land was already sucked up by the plants. And that meant like the land was no longer arable for Gambia and pepper. So the plantation laborers, right? So mainly most of it was Teochew plantation people, laborers. After they use up the land, they would just move on to the next piece of land that could be used for fertile land. So they sort of leave behind them really a track of desolation, as Joseph Balestier described them as being the locusts. Because after they abandoned the piece of land and the land was sort of left to fallow, what grew in their wake was really a lot of lalang and beluga, which is secondary forest, right? And a lot of this was really flammable. So not only do you destroy the land and rob it of its nutrients, you make the land even more flammable, which really caused an issue of forest fires by the end of the 19th century. And so we have a bunch of maps that really show this progression, where a lot of the plantations are bordered on some ends by lalang and brushwood. And we can quite safely presume that these used to be ex-plantation land, but they were abandoned previously. So they just moved out in a very regular fashion. Yeah. And here we have a map of Kranji. So one fun thing about this exhibition is that we get to show lesser seen maps from the National Archives, because we have a lot of maps. Yeah, so it was very nice to have the chance to show this map of Kranji, because Kranji was really one area where Gambia and pepper was being cultivated. So as you can see, right, there's like a bunch of different cultivation plots dotted around the different tributaries of the Kranji River. We can safely presume that this is actually a Gambia and pepper cultivation, right? Because a lot of it was actually based around the river or the foot of the river, as the Teochew say is Kangka or Gangjiao, right? And all these areas, right, would have a headman, which is called the Kangchu or the Gangchu. So Singapore, we had all this like different Kangka, Kangchu nomenclature, but we didn't really have this official system. We borrowed the nomenclature mainly from the Johor river document of Sungai Serat system that was actually existing there. So that was a more official system. And then we borrowed the names and we used it in Singapore, even though it wasn't really that official. So a lot of this like Kangchus, right, eventually had their areas named after them. And that's how we became, we have a lot of the Chu Kangs that we have today in Singapore. And most of the Chu Kangs we see, right, like Yio Chu Kang, Chu Chu Kang, a lot of Chu Kangs like Chan Chu Kang. There was even the Phua Chu Kang at some point in our history, but sorry, Phua Chu Kang is gone. You only have the more contemporary one we have now. A lot of it was based in the western and the northern regions of Singapore because it's the land here, that the land in these areas that was more suitable for Gambia and pepper cultivation. Whereas like for the land in the east, right, it was much more sandy and it wasn't very arable like for this type of crop, which is why a lot of vegetables instead were grown in the area. Yeah. So up till sort of the 1840s, you know, before like roads led into the interior of the island, most of the cultivation happened along the rivers. And that's because rivers were main means of communication and main means of transport, you know, for the goods. And they could sort of, people could sail out like of the river around the island and go to the settlement. But of course, when roads entered the hinterland, as you can see at the side, the right side of this map, you see this long line, right, leading down that borders, like sort of cuts off the river. That's actually a Kranji Road, which was built in the 1840s. And with the building of the road, right, that meant like they could go to town via road now, which means you can transport things by road. And that's how some plantations, these smaller land holdings started popping up alongside the roads as well. And here's another map. It's a geological map of Singapore. And like I mentioned, a lot of these Chu Kangs, you know, that were named after their Kangchus, which their headmen were really based around in this part of the island. Yeah, because of the arable soil. Yep. And of course, when Farquhar was writing about Gambia plantations in the 1820s, right, in the early 1820s, he talked about how there were about some 20 odd land holdings that were on the island. But of course, we cannot verify that because that was only the knowable number. There may have been other secret cultivators who were hiding out and they weren't known to people like Farquhar. So then it was sort of a tenuous number, but okay, we can roughly put it as about 20 plantations. However, in the next 3 decades, Gambia and pepper really took off on Singapore Island due to a lot of changes in a lot of factors. So firstly, you know, the shifting of the regional center for Gambia and pepper production shifted from Riau to Singapore. And there used to be sort of this tariff on Gambia, but by the 1830s, you know, this global tariff was gone and this allowed Gambia to be more easily traded globally. Yeah, so eventually a lot of things shifted in favor of Singapore becoming this regional center for Gambia trade. And that's how Gambia and pepper production sort of exploded on Singapore Island, such that by 1855, as you can see here, we have over 12 million Gambia trees, over 1.5 million pepper vines in over 540 plantations. So that's a crazy number. You know, the whole of Singapore was going crazy for Gambia. Yeah. And we can see all this in a lot of municipal reports. So here I left a very small screenshot, you know, of the different districts that were planting Gambia. They were even keeping track, you know, of the number of trees, you know, are they bearing fruit yet, or are they just young trees, you know? So it was a very systematic sort of cultivation. Okay, but of course, apart from plantation agriculture, right, Singapore's trees were also being harvested for more usual means, which is timber and firewood. And by the late 19th century, right, while a lot of land was used for Gambia pepper cultivation that was very destructive, timber as well was heavily harvested from Singapore. So not mentioned in this slide, but for example, gutta percha was a crop that really sprung to prominence by the 1850s, right? Because they were making the transatlantic telegraph cable. And that was how really the whole of Southeast Asia began like having their gutta percha harvested. And in Singapore, right, there was also gutta percha trees being harvested. And by the start of I think by 1858 or 1857, you know, 1 year before the transatlantic telegraph cable was finished, right, all the gutta percha trees were already harvested from Singapore already. So that was a very sad story. Yeah, so here we have really a book called commercial timber trees of the Malay Peninsula. So there was a forest department, colonial forestry department in the Straits settlement, and they had forest officers go out and really document the different trees, and the different types of trees that existed in the forests. What are their uses? What are their functions? Are they hardwood, softwood? What are they used for? Are they used for mainly furniture or firewood, all different kinds of uses. And this was really a very systematic documentation of the tree. And here we have a forest officer standing next to a Meranti tembaga tree, described in the book in the early 1900s as our most abundant species. What do you guys think happened to this tree? What do you think is the current status of this tree in Malaya, in the region right now? You can share it in the chat. Yeah. And what's cool is you see there's the hole on the page on the right? So they will carve out parts of the tree, like the parts of the bark, and save it as timber samples, which very interestingly, NUS Museum has quite a lot of timber samples. Yeah. Yes, the Meranti tembaga tree is now endangered status. Well, surprising, right? Not surprising. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So a lot of these trees really was harvested to close to extinction or very huge endangerment because of this voracious appetite, right? For timber harvesting, which was very sad. Yeah. So by the end of the 19th century, because of plantation agriculture, because of buildings of roads, because of timber harvesting, Singapore lost 90% of its primary forest already. In just 8 decades, we lost 90% of our primary forest, which is really crazy. It's a very crazy number if you think about it. Yep. And so when we talk about forest clearing and deforestation, right, it's not just about humans' relationships with nature. It's also about animals' relationships with the forest, and also animals' relationships with humans, right? So of course, a lot of these deforestation, when they were happening, we cannot deny that they would also affect the animals that were living in this forest. So one very interesting animal that really popped up during this period of time was the tiger. So as you can see, this very evocative quote by John Cameron, the most remarkable animal of all, the one for which the jungles of Singapore possess a melancholy yet a worldwide reputation, is the tiger. Because by the mid-19th century, Singapore developed a global reputation for having a lot of man-eating tigers. So not just any tigers, tigers that apparently like to eat people. Yeah, and in the background here, we have a photo of a tiger, this alleged encounter between a tiger and G.D. Coleman, who was a superintendent of road public works. So he was in charge of planning out the roads for sort of expansion further into the jungle. And in 1835, apparently, when him and his assistants were sort of using the theodolite, okay, we can't really see the theodolite because it's blocked by the quote, but it's sort of one of the tools, one of the land surveying tools. When he and his assistants were using a theodolite to map out, to plan out, their roads, right? They were stumbled upon by a tiger that apparently leapt out from the bush. And everybody ran away in fright and they left the theodolite on the ground. Yeah, so this was a very famous encounter and it was reported in the news. But we don't really know the veracity of this encounter because it was just reported in the news and there wasn't really much corroboration, I suppose. But the fact is that this encounter has really ignited, I guess, the active imagination of the people, and that's how this lithograph print based on this encounter was made. And I think this print is very interesting because it really shows how the further humans go into the jungles, right, the more encounters, the more fraught their encounters with animals go. Yeah, especially tigers. So yeah. Okay, here we have a quiz. In what year was the first recorded tiger sighting in Singapore? Okay, congratulations, guys. Most of you got it correct. Yeah, it's 1831. So the first recorded tiger sighting was in a newspaper report in 1831, where it was found that a man was found dead from a tiger attack in the Rochelle area. Yeah, so it's quite a scary encounter, I suppose. So yeah, so 1831 really is the starting point, I guess, for a century of very fraught encounters between humans and tigers in Singapore. Because a lot of the tigers the tigers aren't native to Singapore. They actually are widely believed to have swarmed to Singapore from the Malay Peninsula. And they would actually stop for a brief break on Pulau Tekong and Pulau Ubin before they continued swimming over. And they came to Singapore to find food and to breed and to have children and to have cubs and to sort of raise their cubs. Yeah, so they came, and quite interestingly is deforestation was actually one very key factor that brought the tigers to Singapore, because tigers like to roam in forest edges because there's like tall grass and all that, and there's a lot of little prey like like mouse deer, like wild boar that tigers can pounce on and eat. And what happens in deforestation is that when you cut down forests, you are effectively producing forest edges, which are very ideal hunting grounds for the tigers. And that's why a lot of the tigers end up encountering humans in Singapore. But that's also because humans also started going further into the jungle, which would bring them further in contact with animals. And the main, most of the victims of all these tiger encounters were really the plantation coolies who were not only in charge of clearing jungle, but also worked in the plantations that bordered these jungles. In fact, by 1890s, I think like about 60% of the death rate, of the mortality rate from human encounters with tigers were really a lot of Chinese plantation coolies, because they just happen to work in very precarious working conditions. Yeah. So we have here a quote from an account of a tiger attack from a coolie witness about how he saw his colleague get dragged away by a tiger. Yeah, and this is just one of many like encounters of a coolie with a tiger. And it's because tigers were very good at hiding in tall grass, and they were very silent. So a coolie can't even run away if he wanted to, because the moment he realizes the tiger is there, the tiger is already upon him and he's dead. Yeah. So it was very precarious working environment. Oh, a lot of them will actually end up running away from plantations, because obviously if you either want to live your life or you risk being killed. So a lot of the plantation coolies end up running away from their plantations. And of course, this was bad news for their capitalist plantation owners who wanted to retain profits. So capitalist plantation owners will actually hide the deaths caused by tigers, and they will actually make coolies, like some coolies will also secretly bury the bodies, that were killed by tigers, and the police had to come and exhume the bodies to see, oh, this person died by a tiger attack. Yeah, so a lot of the numbers of tiger attacks, and even the population of tigers during this point of time was very unclear, because while you have some accounts of tigers, so there was one number where it said that one person died to a tiger every day. So there's 365 people died to a tiger every year. So you have accounts embellishing these tiger encounters, but you also, on the other hand, have people who are actively covering up, be it the plantation coolies who have their own superstitions, or be it the plantation owners who don't want people to know that there's tigers infesting their plantations, because if people know, their plantation value would plummet. Yeah. So that's why it's very hard to get like a firm grasp of really the numbers and statistics in this point of time about tigers. Yep. And of course, with tiger attacks, come new ways of people trying to kill and sort of capture tigers, right? So there are different types of traps. Okay, not pictured on this slide is really the more common way of capturing tigers. So people will actually dig pits in different parts of Singapore. So Bukit Timah was a very popular place where people would dig a lot of pits for tigers, and they would place like sharp stakes at the bottom of the pit. So the tiger falls into it, they might get impaled by the sticks. Sorry, it sounds very terrible. But yeah, that was a way of catching tigers. The pit would be about like 7 to 10 meters deep, and the moment a tiger got caught, people would rush at the pit, and take turns to shoot the tiger until it dies. Yeah. So another method is by setting up traps, which this method was much more debatable, I suppose. As you can see, a picture of a trap, of a wooden trap. They would put like a bait inside the trap to get the tiger to come in. So maybe it's a dead goat. And once they lure the tiger in, the mechanism would trigger, the door would shut on the trap, and the tiger would be trapped in it. Yeah. This was not very useful, because there were cases where it was reported in the news that some tigers, they got trapped in the cage, and then they eventually managed to break out of the cage, which means like the cage wasn't that good at all, and that really caused a lot of panic for people. So these are the two main methods. Yeah, and the police at that point of time were sort of one of the groups, I suppose, in charge of keeping track of the tiger, like of the catching of tigers on the island. And here we have this very interesting recommendation by Thomas Dunman, who was the Commissioner of Police, where he says that he wants to rub poison on a goat's neck, rub strychnine on a goat's neck, because it's colorless and it's odorless, and it was a very classic murder mystery. It was a very classic murder method in Agatha Christie mystery, I suppose. He would rub the poison on the goat's neck, and he would tie the goat to a fence bordering a forest, and he would leave the goat out there. So if a passing tiger sees the goat, pounces on it and bites it on the neck, the tiger would die from poisoning soon after. And he thinks this plan is amazing. What do you guys think? Do you guys think this plan is good? Yes, it didn't work. So a tiger passed by, looked at the goat, and then just walked off. Maybe the tiger was smart. Maybe the tiger thought this meal was too easy. Who knows? But this plan didn't work. Yeah, but it really shows really the lengths to which, you know, they tried to capture the tigers of Singapore Island. Yeah. Okay, of course. Okay, by the 20th century, right, a lot of the hype surrounding game hunting in Singapore really died down. So for much of the 19th century, a lot of the European game hunters came to this part of the world lah, and they were really hunting and spending nights in the forest trying to stake out tigers. But of course, by the 20th century, right, there was a more sort of compelling forests to be in, which was the freshly deforested forests of the Malay Peninsula. So a lot of the Europeans end up going over there to find tigers, which tigers were actually native there, so the raw tigers. And who was left on the island to hunt down the tigers? Is this group of people called the Straits Hunting Party. And as you can see on the left, I think this picture on the left is quite a famous photo, which some of you might have encountered before. It's a picture of the alleged last tiger of Singapore, you know, being captured dead at the milestone of Choa Chu Kang village by these three men, who was actually part of a larger group called the Straits Hunting Party. So as you can see the picture on the right here, they're actually in this picture, on this larger group of pictures. So it's really a very huge organized group of people who in a Chinese newspaper was purportedly mentioned to be sort of reading Singapore of the tiger manners, even though by the 20th century, honestly, there were barely any tigers left. Yeah, so you can see it was a very huge organized group, and there were actually people who were like, there were like beaters and trackers. So the trackers would track the tigers. There were beaters who would actually use loud noise, you know, to beat out the tigers, like to lure the tiger out. And then there were people with the guns, of course, to shoot down the tiger. Yeah, and you can't see it really here on this slide, sorry, but actually they would also note down the names of the people in this group. So like from left to right, who hunted the tiger at where, you know. So this was a very yeah, and they basically hunted down the tigers to alleged extinction of Singapore Island. Yeah, they're gone. So this is the very sad story of tigers. It's 100 years of tiger history, which I went through in about 10 minutes. Yeah. So, okay, the next crop after Gambia and Pepper, right? So by the 20th century, Gambia sort of fell out of fashion already. And this really new crop emerged, and it's called rubber. But do you know that the rubber was actually, rubber was the birthplace of the Malayan rubber industry was actually the Singapore Botanic Gardens. Because prior to the late 19th century, early 20th century, rubber was mainly harvested in the wild, you know, in the forests of South America, forests of Africa. And that's because rubber tapping methods were very destructive to the tree. They either cut the rubber they cut the incision too deep, and the trees died really quickly, which meant that they haven't really figured out a way to mass cultivate rubber that will make it profitable. But this fella here in this photo called Henry Ridley, you know, who was the first director of the Singapore Botanic Gardens, when he came to Singapore, he was very interested in experimenting with economic crops, and one of his favorite crops was really rubber. And here we show him beside a rubber tree where you see there's this herringbone incision, which was the method that he improved upon from the Sri Lankan method, where you sort of cut very narrow, very shallow incisions on the rubber tree, you know, to draw out the latex. And interestingly, it worked. So he finally figured out a way to tap rubber from a tree such that the tree would be still left alive and standing for the next few decades. And from there, you know, the Malay rubber tree sort of took root. Yeah. But of course, before it took root, he was very adamant on getting different people to plant rubber. So the crops at this point of time, I think the most popular crop was like coffee. So he would go around to social functions and he would carry rubber seeds and he would stuff it into different people's pockets, you know, and be like, hey bro, do you want to plant this and plant that? You know, this is great. Yeah. And because he was so enthusiastic about planting rubber, people started calling him mad, really, because maybe they were like, are you mad? Why are you making us plant this thing? And he had another nickname called Rubber Ridley. Yeah, so they really showed the length to which he tried to get different planters to plant rubber. And in this exhibition, we have a book called The Story of the Rubber Industry in Malaya, where it's really like a promotional brochure he wrote talking about how wonderful rubber is and why you should plant it. Yeah, and I left a quote here on this slide, you can see. You know, it's not a mere flash in the pan, apparently, and it's a thoroughly sound, steady, and profitable business. Yeah. So Ridley's discovery of this method of allowing rubber to be tapped without harming the tree immediately sort of coincided with the rise of the automobile industry, right? And we all know tires need rubber. So this was really an opportune moment, and everything, the stars aligned, and rubber rose in Malaya. Yes. Of course, a lot of major rubber planters we have in Malaya are Chinese the Chinese plantation owners, right? So we have here Tan Kaki's Hoxan Plantation. So Tan Kaki got into rubber planting because his good friend Tan Cheyan, who was really one of the first rubber planter in Malaya. So he started Malaya's first rubber plantation in 1896. And 10 years later, in 1906, Tan Kaki was like, hey, I'm going to start planting rubber too in his Hoxan plantation. He originally cut down forests for this plantation to plant pineapples because pineapples were cool, as in Singapore had a very cool pineapple tinning industry at that point of time as well. So pineapples were very profitable. Yeah. But after he saw his friends, planting rubber, he's like, hey, I'm going to plant rubber too. And rubber and pineapples went well together. They were very complementary because you could actually harvest pineapples while waiting for rubber to mature. So they work very well together as complementary crops. Yeah. And here you see I made the words big. So portions colored green and edged with blue and red are planted with pines, which are pineapples. Of course, eventually he interplanted rubber and pineapple. Yep. This area today is apparently where the Sembawang hot springs are. But unfortunately, I cannot verify it. I'll let you guys know when I verify it. But yeah, this is in the Seletar area. Yep. And of course, another famous plantation owner is this fella, Lim Nisun, who's looking very dapper in this photo. Yeah. Usually I will get people to guess which one is Lim Nisun, but as you can see, the guy in the best pose is Lim Nisun himself. Yeah. And what's really cool about this photo is it's a rubber factory truck, but it's carrying a ton of pineapples, which really shows the co-cultivation system that these Malayan planters really popularized in the region. Yeah. And this is him in Bulim Plantations, which is in the Chua-Chu-Kang, around the Chua-Chu-Kang region, in 1916. So rubber and pineapple sort of took over where Gambia Pepper used to be. So almost the whole of Singapore from east to west really was just a rubber orchard, huge rubber orchard. Yeah. Yeah, here you see this map made by one of our exhibition partners, Tony O'Dempsey. You see the rubber plantation, it really just blanketed the whole of Singapore. Yeah. And then we have a municipal catchment area in the middle, which was founded in 1900 to protect our water supply. Yeah, but other than that, apart from the red areas, which were our early forest reserves, rubber was just ringing over the island. Yes. And yeah, that's a tiny part of our exhibition that we've shared. If you want to know more, please visit us. I think we have dozen tours up for grabs again. In the next few weeks, I think we'll be opening up more physical tour slots as well. We'll be releasing a bunch of other digital content as well. We have Georgina and me talking about different artifacts. We'll be uploading it on YouTube and Facebook. And we also have an accompanying Blue Asia publication, if you've not checked it out yet. It's a special nature issue that's related to our exhibition. And it talks about very interesting nature stories that we have not covered in the exhibition as well.